Benefactor underwriting for this broadcast has been provided by a grant from Republic Bank. The power of red is back. Major underwriting support for this broadcast has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, Marks Paneth. Additional underwriting support has been provided by grants from AmTrust Title, Bank of America, Capital One Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, the One Stop Property Group, and these friends.
What's really happening in the office market? You know, how many people are coming to work? Are people working 5 days a week? Are people not preferring to be in the city? I don't know the answers. So today I've assembled this group of business leaders to provide their insight on the office market in New York City. My guests include Scott Gallen, who is the chairman and CEO of Handro Properties LLC, and also the same position at ESSH Investments. Leslie Himmel, who's been with me many years ago, who's returning today with the renewal at the studio, who's the principal at Himmel Marinkoff Properties. And last but not least, Tommy Craig, who is a principal at Hines. So since you're the newbie over here, okay, and you have a significant number of properties over here that people don't really know that you're all involved with, what do you see what's really happening in the office market? Because, you know, the regs tell you one thing. I try to let the people tell me the truth.
Well, Michael, after 40 years, it's nice that someone describes me as a newbie. It's been a long time. You know, I don't think you can think of the office market in a singular way. You have to really think about the multiplicities, you know, that exist. And that's how we think. The difference between new buildings and existing buildings, the difference between high quality space and dated space. Our portfolio is actually about 10 million square feet. It covers that spectrum, as we were saying beforehand. I think the best way to think about what's happening in the office market is to really look at occupancy levels in the buildings. And, you know, we have a portfolio downtown, about 6 million square feet with Hudson Square. The occupancy levels in those buildings are between 10 and 20%. In our Midtown portfolio with Ivanhoe Cambridge and at One Vanderbilt, occupancy levels are closer to 30 or 40%. We have a couple of buildings in Greenwich. The occupancy levels are even higher. And that's an interesting insight. I also think that you can map occupancy to users that value their culture and create that culture in the workplace.
Leslie?
It's not my first rodeo with difficult times, and these indeed have been challenging times since COVID. We could not have predicted the shutdown in New York City in March of 2020, and at that point we all thought we were coming back in April or May or June, and it's been quite a while that office workers stayed away. Although since September, a few months ago, we have seen a huge uptick, at least in our properties, which are mainly 100,000 to 300,000 square feet with operable windows. We've seen a big uptick in tenants coming back. And I know we were talking about this before, and Tommy noted, I mean, on the streets, you go to, and you look at Broadway, you look at restaurants, you look at activity, there's an awful lot of activity happening again. Many companies were coming back in September, and I'm on the board of M&T's mortgage committee. They were coming back originally October, November. When the Delta variant ticked back up, they pushed it to January. But we're seeing a number of companies, real estate, we've all been back since June 2020 because we need to be physically in our offices to help do the leasing and renovate buildings. But we're starting to see the numbers come back up for existing tenants as also mandates for everyone to come back. And I love John Gray's expression, better together, because I think there's a lot of collision that happens when we're working together and new ideas and creativity happens.
So when do we see 70% occupancy? Okay.
I don't know about 70%, but I believe that I have the benefit. These are professional real estate folks, and I just started this 15 years ago. And prior to that, I built and ran a business with 300 people in an office in Manhattan. And therefore, understanding that people need to work together is something I believed in from day one of this pandemic, when they had written off offices and this was all going to be work from home. And I said, I think you folks don't understand, over time what we're losing with the physicality here and the ad hoc conversations and physical meetings and collegiality. And because I couldn't imagine doing this for very long in a business with a sizable office. Now, at the beginning, like Leslie said, we were in there a month later.
But I believe the real estate industry, they went back to work, okay? Most people were back to work, okay? I don't believe it's taken place in the other industries.
We have over 60% physical occupancy in the core portfolio right now, and in some cases, it's hard to count the amount of people in each tenancy, but we do this anecdotally, and I'd say we have 45% of the bodies are there, with 60 to 65% of the tenants that are open, some of them with limited, and we have many tenants that are there 5 days a week, fully staffed.
And they also have, like the finance companies, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Blackstone, they called their employees back. So I think you have a number of companies that have the philosophy better together.
Yeah, but the FANG companies have not come back yet.
I think we would probably all agree on a few things. Our space, even when used at its best, will not be used in the same ways. Yeah. Work from home is not going away. Mm-hmm. So I don't think our space will be used as intensively. We may not measure it as a percentage of occupancy. We're probably going to think in terms of days per week. And interestingly, our own attitude is that New York City, when we try to recruit people here from other parts of Hines, New York is not only, prohibitively expensive, but it's got lengthy commutes that are really, not found anywhere else. And so I think actually work from home has the possibility, if it's a day a week or 2 days a week, of improving the quality of life for people who work in New York City but do not live there, which is an important part of our workforce. I think part of the reason One Vanderbilt is doing so well, it's obviously a singular building, but I think Grand Central as a public resource is comparatively more important post-COVID than pre-COVID.
I believe you're going to see more development in Grand Central and a repurposing of buildings in Grand Central than any other section of town. Because with the Long Island Railroad, with Penn Station, with all the situation over there, the infrastructure, people want to be there. Grand Central is stronger. I think the Times Square neighborhood, I think it's a question on what's happening in Times Square, and I think part of that is with the safety discussion that we had. But here's my question. What happens to these obsolete buildings? You walk in Grand Central, you walk in other areas, these are obsolete buildings, and today we're saying that the work environment's going to have to change, okay, the physical work environment. How are we going to take care of this? You and I were discussing this before. Unless we will have a new mayor, we will have a city council, but we have to have legislation. When the 421Gs were instituted in Lower Manhattan, there were major incentives for companies to get involved.
And Michael, do you mind if we go back and answer your question about the FANG companies?
Yes.
Google is a major tenant of ours at 345 Hudson Street, occupy about 300,000 square feet. But more importantly, they occupy that space as part of creating a second campus. We're across from 550 Washington, where they just closed on a significant purchase option, and they're in 315 Hudson Street. And the reason I raised Google is the chairman is, reaffirmed their commitment to that campus, reaffirmed New York City's role in terms of the workforce in that company. And I think the big takeaway is that they value space and the physical culture. New York is a preferred place to achieve their diversity goals, as well as their goals of making sure that I don't think that talented people are following Google to New York. I think Google is following talented young people because they choose to be in New York. And I don't think that's going to change.
I also think, the entrepreneur-sized tenants that we have in our portfolio, 5,000, 8,000, 7,000, 4,000, these folks had to come back to work. They are entrepreneurial. They work like that, and it's very hard.
But an entrepreneur can work from home.
No, but Mike, you can't run you don't have a VP of this and a VP of that and a VP of this and a VP of that. And it is more important when you have 25 people to be around each other than when you're running a Fortune 500 company. You can tell everybody to telecommute, whatever. So we found these smaller tenants coming back way faster because they needed to be together.
Yeah, I would echo that. So in our Nomad portfolio, we had the most amount of tours early on, and started, so I told you this, Michael, last week, that we started signing leases. Reonomy took the top floor of 6 East 32nd Street. And, yes, they're only taking 10 to 15,000 square feet, and some were smaller, 5,000, 10,000, instead of doing 10-year leases, 5-year leases. But those companies absolutely have started signing leases and coming back. And to go stay on that so the smaller companies who want to be together, and there's 20 people or 40 people, it's to have their culture coming back, is very important.
People are signing leases, but before the show, Tommy and I were talking about the incentives that landlords are providing to tenants today.
In an A building, maybe, but our rents are down. They're down 15, 20% net effective.
Yeah.
But as Leslie said, in the last 3 months, we've shown more space than we did in the prior 15 in aggregate, and we've leased.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think what the opportunities, okay, I happened to speak to someone about the BDO Seidman lease over here. Okay, I still call it the Pan Am building, okay? But 200 Park Avenue is a Class A building, okay? It's in great condition. The rent, the TI, when you look at everything, the net effective rent is so cheap.
Right. Well, Midtown, if you look at the stats, I saw a Cushman & Wakefield report last week, Midtown's rents have gone down way more than like Park Avenue South, which is it's an interesting phenomenon. Midtown got really decimated in, everywhere, Midtown East, Midtown
no
West.
res, it's no quality of life.
I've been down in Hudson Square for the last 15 years, seeing on Winston CBS.
Right.
I've seen the evolution, okay? I've seen the housing. Okay, and look what you have over there.
Well, Hudson Square is actually a case study in urban regeneration. And as we said, it dates back almost 15 years to when Carl Weisbrod was at Trinity. He, really led an effort. It had a manufacturing, designation. And truthfully, after 5 o'clock night, it stopped having any purpose. The change to permit residential and to create, a mixed-use neighborhood, but with legacy buildings that have appeal, particularly for the younger people that have become more important in the workforce, has now, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years, I don't think there's another neighborhood in New York that has changed as quickly. 10,000 new residential, 10,000 new, residents, the Google transaction, the Disney, you're talking about $10 billion.
Google, major.
No,
Our project at 555, Greenwich. And it's interesting, none of that work has been abandoned. New projects keep being announced. Mm-hmm. And I think it's largely, for things that we all know have always worked in New York. It's surrounded by 3 great residential neighborhoods, Greenwich Village, Soho, Tribeca. It's next to what I think is probably the most significant public resource that has been, delivered to New York City residents in the last 30 or 40 years, the Hudson River Park. It's really, one of our big themes in the last 30 years is the center of gravity in New York City has been shifting south and west. And you look at Hudson Yards, you look at the Extell project, you look at Hudson Square, they're all on an edge. And it's interesting with Midtown East, it's stabilizing that. When you think of One Vanderbilt, when you think of JP Morgan, and so we're at a moment in time where you can't think of either the space market as one thing, and you can't think of, we've never done a building looking at a third-party report that relies on averages. We have a portfolio where the rents go from $50 to $300 a foot. So I actually think the reports that we read have very little value. In Chicago, they've had, persistent vacancy rates close to 15%. And yet we've always found a market where we can, develop significant new buildings. Earlier this year, we announced a major lease over 500,000 square feet with Kirkland and Ellis. And so I think in New York, when we think of the market, and I think everyone will agree with this, we are leaning into two new development projects, one at 1 Madison, one at 555 Greenwich Street. And I think if we accept the fact that employers will need to offer something different and better to attract people back to the office, the biggest gap we're going to see isn't about geography. It's about new buildings versus old buildings. And those new buildings are going to have significant amenities. They're going to have to really address, the issue of sustainable design. Decision makers coming up care about all of that. And I can tell you, we do not have the same program for a new building post-COVID that we did pre-COVID. We're addressing a different generation of leaders.
And I think co-working is an important idea, and maybe even more important as you will have tenants that want flexible space. We clearly had way too much co-working space. They were the biggest taker of space, except for JP Morgan. I think the co-working got up to whatever, 6 million square feet. It expanded too quickly, exponentially, and many co-working sites, some being WeWork, some being Spaces, some being Industrious, were cannibalizing their own spaces. So instead of being, one every 10 blocks, they were almost doing, I don't quite understand what was being done. It was too many of the same properties.
They were clustered near each other.
Right, so it's like for Starbucks that actually worked, but for co-working that doesn't. So if you look at Schultz's, the pinning of all the Starbucks, for some reason it worked in the retail, but it doesn't work for co-working.
Do you see people taking shorter term leases now?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe those giant spaces, no, but we're doing, like Leslie said, people want to be malleable now. We have a building 150,000 feet where we have 100 spaces, and that's the way it was designed. And little architects would take it, and small professional firm, and all of a sudden, once the pandemic happened, we didn't have much vacancy to begin with, but we lost some tenants. And all of a sudden I said, run an ad saying walls and doors, because people didn't want to be in common spaces. Right. And we did, walls and doors. And all of a sudden we filled up these 140 spaces, and the building's 99% occupied now, and people can go in there. And we'll do a lease for 2 years. We're putting very, small TIs, and but it gives people flexibility. And then some of them say, I'm ready for a 5-10 year deal, and we can move them to an office space. So I think Leslie's point about a lot of these smaller tenants, first, I don't want anywhere near New York City. That was the beginning of it. And then I'm ready to come back a little. Now I want to take a 2-year lease. And a lot of them now are like, okay, I'm ready to roll.
What about you?
Well, I think it's interesting how the conversation's evolved. I kind of put an emphasis that when we think of tenants, one way we segment are the tenants who really want a quality workplace. I think there's a whole nother group of tenants that want to address uncertainty with flexibility, whether it's generic co-working space or whether it's flexible lease terms. I think they both have significant currency with users today, perhaps probably the two things that matter most. And truthfully, I bet most of us would agree our best tenant prospects are existing tenants, working with them to really allow flexibility is a big deal, whether it's flexibility in term or amount of space.
It's also good for the tenant in a different manner, because the tenant now, they don't have to have the expense of moving.
Michael, I think you're putting your finger on another important point, which is, I think as a landlord, it's really important to orient yourself to thinking about our tenants as our customers and finding a way to help solve their problems. And that's why I think flexibility matters. But they're all dealing with something. And whether we need to provide more amenities in a building or find a way to deal with giving them flexible lease terms, I think fundamentally we have to realize there's been a paradigm shift and our users are facing some really existential issues, and we have to be part of that dialogue with them. It's less transactional and I think more cooperative.
No, you brought up Boston before, okay, and you were talking, I mean, Boston is Cambridge with the life sciences. Life sciences become a huge business in New York. Where do you see that for Hines even?
So we have actually looked very hard at a building, 160 Varick Street, in the Hudson Square portfolio for life sciences. And here's the basic takeaway. To attract a single floor of a life science user, you're probably, across building-wide improvements, spending $300 a foot. But the cost of the second floor, because it's marginal cost pricing, is $50 a foot. So if you can get the critical mass, and this is where clustering matters. Why is, I think, Midtown East successful? Because they've clustered JP Morgan with our multi-tenant building at One Vanderbilt and the new building, that Scott Reckler will put up.
And
I
also
think
the former MTA building location
with Boston Properties and KPF. Right. That kind of clustering, I think, becomes important. And I think that it's critical that New York City be a part of the expansion of that sector. We have all the venture capital funding. We've got, the right kind of institutions here with the hospital system, Rockefeller University. And I think we're going to have to lean into that. I don't know why we're not really, as a matter of public policy.
I mean, you have a building which is in Deadpan Alley, okay? Basically the hospital alley over there on First Avenue.
Well, we have 114 First Avenue, and we've had the hospitals in there from the very beginning of our acquisition in 1996. But we actually have a life science project, which I didn't know was life science when we bought it in 2005. And we had inherited LabCorp, Genzyme, and then our first tenant we put in was the Stem Cell Foundation, the Tisch Stem Cell Foundation for MS, and they now have a floor and a half. And now CBS was our main tenant. CBS left, and we are repositioning it for life science. So we've been entertaining and negotiating some leases. Our estimate is actually way more than 300 because we have, our cost estimate is more like 400 to 450 a foot. We're pricing out some work letters.
I mean, it depends on what you start with, right? In terms of the building
yeah,
codes.
but just it's the air conditioning and the venting and the plumbing. Yeah, for sure.
Will you be handling chemicals, or is it biology?
No,
life
no,
science?
no, not
But the city
chemicals.
has come up with certain tax
Right.
incentives which
But not
try to
really,
create-
okay, because like 525 West 57th Street, which is right near Mount Sinai West, and you're near a cluster over there also, because you have, Mount Sinai took space in Ackman's building at 787 11th, and you also have small companies that have gone into 619 West 54th Street. So that's become a cluster on the west side, and our floors are bigger. They're 50,000 square feet, so we're negotiating for bigger tenants. The work letters are high, just because you are doing a lot of the building systems. But I think New York City only has around 2.5 million square feet out of over 400 million square feet. Boston has over 30 million square feet. So as a percentage of the total, I couldn't agree with Tommy more, that we need to be leaning in. And the tax incentive packages, which EDC needs to lean in more in the city, because they're not really.
So let's talk about the tax incentives. Okay, Scott has small buildings, a number of small buildings, which can be converted to residential. Okay, people like being on the west side over there.
if they're zoned right, and we're invested
No,
in a
if they're zoned right, if the government gives tax incentives to, as I said before, with the 421
Yeah,
Gs.
we need to have that.
Okay, otherwise, and also the ADA and the emissions controls and all the environmental things.
Resi rental occupancy is way up, and
Right.
like the Soho,
It's the strongest
Soho,
sector,
We're,
other than
we're
industrial.
invested in a ton of that stuff, and it was
Right.
really bad the first 60 days, and now all of a sudden I'm getting calls, can you get my daughter? And I'm like, we don't have anything, but, you know, and that all happened in the last 120
well,
days.
let's hope the Soho rezoning happens, because you could use, and I'm very big on this 15-minute city, which you so well developed down in Hudson Square. But I think it's really crucial that the zoning
I mean,
becomes
if you look,
more-
going back to Bloomberg, the rezoning, what he did in Williamsburg,
Brilliant.
I mean, in Greenpoint, and
Right.
these areas have really helped out. Okay, you need a progressive government, you need a good mayor, you need a good city council, and you have to move on.
Well, today's election day, so hopefully we have a change that's way more pro-business and goes back to the Bloomberg ideas.
So I'd love to say, I think we came out with, the apple is reasonably shiny, okay? Hopefully it'll become very shiny, and
hope.
you know, and things will look over there.
We
Hope
all need
have
to
you-
dare to hope, right?
Okay, hope to have all of you back later on in the season. I'd like to thank Scott, Leslie, our producer, okay, and Tommy for being here. See you next week.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
A lot of fun.